Good evening. What I wanted to talk about in this video is my last project that I sort of featured on in my prior videos was that the small flip lid box I made, and I sort of touted it as a basic, a nice beginner project for somebody who wants to make something where you're first beginning to use joinery and use and a project where you can use hand tools, power tools, or both, or either. And what I wanted to talk about in this video, hopefully very briefly, is the tools I used to make that box, because I think a lot of times when you're new, especially when you're new, it's at a level of intimidation when you see any project, because you don't know if you have the right tools, you don't know if you have enough tools. So I just want to really very briefly go over what I used and where I used them. The first, obviously, a tool that you're going to use on most projects, and one that has a little bit of dust on it, a combination square. I have a 6-inch and I also have a 12-inch. I would recommend having both, but I'd start off with one of these. This is a Starrett. You don't need to get a Starrett. For many years, I had a Craftsman, and I still have a Craftsman 12-inch. That was perfectly fine. The only reason I stopped using the Craftsman was because I dropped it off of a ladder, and it just never seated right again after that. But you're going to use it. You're going to use this tool on many projects, woodworking and non. It's if you're a homeowner or a DIYer, this is something you're going to want to have no matter what. I used a crosscut saw. I used this to saw the boards to length, and for full disclosure's sake, I ripped the boards on a table saw, and I squared up one edge with the table saw, using the crosscut, the miter guide. It's just a habit. I've always, every time I use a table saw, I square one end. It's just a habit I've gotten into. You don't have to do that, but it's something I would recommend if you're using a table saw. But you can certainly do that with a saw like this. And I also used a longer panel saw to saw the lid to final length. I could have used this, but the panel saw seemed is definitely a little bit more aggressive, and it just seemed like a better option. But you certainly could use this. This would work just fine. It would just take a little longer. Obviously, a tape measure. You could use a folding rule. Anything that you need, anything that will mark distances and allow you to do your layout. This is a 10-footer from Stanley. I wouldn't recommend more than a 15-footer, or a folding rules always work great. I have several. Marking gauge. This gauge is a knife gauge, which I prefer over the pin gauge. The pin. I have. Excuse me. Here's one here I made. I made that with just a dowel, strap wood, piece of store-bought hardware, and a cut nail. These work just as well as a pin gauge. This cost me, I mean, really, $5 to make, rather than spending $50 for one with a pin gauge, where I don't like those. The pins they get dull really quickly, and you have to continually file them. I just don't care for them. That's just my personal preference. Block plane. Another tool. Some people will tell you don't need a block plane. I think they're invaluable. And once again, you're going to use this on many of your projects, even if you really prefer power tools. you will find yourself reaching for a block plane. Another really invaluable tool, flush cut saw, super flexible, very thin kerf. Another tool you're going to find yourself reaching for if you have it. Very inexpensive. These are under $10 if I'm not mistaken. You can't resharpen them, but they stay sharp for a long time. You'll definitely get your money's worth out of this before you have to replace it. I used 2 chisels, a skew chisel and a 3/4 inch, just a regular bevel edge chisel. I use these to remove the recess for the hinges. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep quiet. It's really late here. Router plane, same thing. I use this for the recess for the hinges. Didn't really have to use this. It wasn't a must-have tool for this project, but it did help. And these are really nice. The recesses were only an eighth of an inch down. It was nice to use this sort of as a almost like your marking knife. I could have gotten away with using this rather than this, but in a couple places it was too tight for this. So, but that don't let me discourage you from getting one of these. Or making one. They're really as I said, an invaluable tool. The next tool was smooth plane. Once again, one of those tools that you're going to use on a lot of projects. Could have used a jack plane. Either this was smaller and it made more sense because the project was small. I use this to edge joint the panels that I was going up. I didn't have to use this. I could have very well used this. I did this just as an experiment and I think I did post a little video of myself doing it, just to show that you could use a lot of different tools to do that actual operation. You don't necessarily need to use one specific tool. And the other tool I used was this to make the rabbets and also the groove on the underside of the box, so I could put the plywood base in. These, once again, this is another one I highly recommend getting if you're going to get into hand tools. I could have done that on the table saw. It worked just as well. But this does, what I do like about this over a table saw, especially for the rabbets, the grooves, it wouldn't have mattered as much. This makes a much smoother bottom, a smoother face on the, and so it makes glue up a lot easier. And I with a table saw, when you do that, a lot of times you have to go in with a chisel or even sandpaper and bottom it out and get rid of the little ridges that are always invariably going to be left over. These are super inexpensive on the used market. I've never seen one more than $50. I'm sure somebody's selling them for a lot, but this one was given to me, but I would have no issues buying one of these for the price that they're sold for, and they're really easy to make. These are much simpler than even a hand plane, which is a fairly simple tool. This one does not have an adjustment lever. They make them with adjustment levers. They're more, in my mind, more desirable. But as I said, this was given to me, so there was no point in seeking out one that I had to pay for when I got that for free. But yeah, hand and drill, regular 12-volt drill for the hinges, and I use Dales as mechanical fasteners, as I mentioned, and you could use a hand, like a beater drill. I have no problem with those tools. I just don't think I think they're overrated, to be honest. People see that they're cool and all that, and if you really don't want to use any electricity for whatever reasons, they work. That is better, and I don't care what anybody says. That's better than a egg beater drill in almost every regard, as long as you have power. So yeah, these were all the tools I used, and could have used more, I guess, but I didn't really need to. But the whole outlay of money, I would say here, if you had to buy all these tools new, is probably going to be in the $500 range. Used, some of them, if you're finding them on the vintage market and all that, you could probably cut that total in half. But, and not counting the table saw, obviously. But these tools can get you through many projects that are small to mid-size. If you're getting more in a more refined, more developed type of projects that are larger, you're probably gonna need to graduate to some different tools, especially if you're using hand tools. You're gonna have to get a larger plane, firstly, like a joiner plane or yeah, I realize that a substitute. A joiner plane is, you're going to need one if you're doing edges, long edges, 3, 4, or 5 foot long stock. And a rabbet plane you'd probably want to get. But if you're using a table saw, that a lot of that can be eliminated for the time being until you decide you want to graduate to hand tools. And the other thing I wanted to talk about real quickly is I mentioned in my other video that I had helped a family member move, and I found some old tools. Here's the level I cleaned up. If you saw it in the last video, it looked like heck, but it's still the actual level function on it was just fine. So what I did, I cleaned it with, I removed the guard for the top vial, and I cleaned it. It was just rusty. It just needed to be cleaned. So I soaked it in some rust remover and just polished it up. The body of the level I cleaned with soap and warm water, like dish detergent, warm water. I put a coat of BLO on it, wiped it off, let it dry overnight, and I added a second coat. And did the same thing, let it dry overnight. And then I added 3 coats of wax to this regular furniture wax. And it turned out really nicely. It looks really good. I really don't have a specific need for it, but seeing it sitting on a shelf in a garage probably for 35 or 40 years, and looking like heck, I'm glad that I was able to get it back to looking pretty decent again. And the other tool was this. I found this 3/8 chiseler. I actually just put a coat of wax on it before I finished. Before I started filming. And I will probably add one more coat before it's all said and done. Now this was a little trickier to get up and running. It's a W. The brand is W Butcher. I've certainly familiar with that brand. I've never owned one of their chisels. Restoring this was not, I don't want to say it wasn't fun, it was not easy, let's put it that way. It was firstly covered in rust. So what I ended up, I soaked it in rust remover. The edge was so I actually filmed the video, but I decided not to post it. It was too long. The edge was so beat up that I actually used the power grinder to get it squared up again. It would have taken me hours to do it by hand. I don't really care for power grinders too much, but that is what they're made for. Specifically when you have an edge that's so bad that there's really no other way to fix it without giving yourself, inflaming your carpal tunnel syndrome. So I flattened the back. Had never been prepped. I could tell that immediately. I could see all the original grinding marks were still on. All the milling marks were still on there. So I prepped the back. It's turned out pretty good. I could probably use more work. I was more worried about the very tip. But what I did was I sharpened. I used the diamond plates, the lower, the rougher grit. I did my first, my first honing. I went right back to the grinder, and I ground off everything I honed because I knew this from experience that the steel there was probably going to be bad, and it was. It just it crumbled right off. And then I went through the whole rigmarole again. I sharpened it up to. I used the two diamond, the coarse and the fine diamond plate. I used the black Arkansas stone. Then I used leather strap, and it turned out it's very sharp right now. It's got a really nice edge on it. And I did use a honing guide. From now forward, I probably won't do that, but I wanted to make sure that that edge that I worked so hard to get back to square remained square. The tool steel on this is really nice. I'm really impressed with it. I don't really care for the handle too much. It seems like when we talk about tools being balanced, it seems clunky to me. I like socket chisels, not because of this socket somehow magic, just because I like how they fit in my hand. I don't everything. It's just an ergonomic decision. It has nothing to do with this mystical quality that some people attribute to them. The handle, to me, is just too long, and talking about balance, it doesn't feel balanced. I've heard and seen in writing people say that there's no such thing as balance or a chisel. There certainly is. Every tool has balance to it. So if they feel good in your hand, they're balanced. If they don't feel good in your hand, they're not balanced. And like when I put this in here in my holder, it falls over. It just does not feel. It feels like the blade should be longer or the handle should be shorter. Let's put it that way. As far as the handle is concerned, it was really, really grungy. So I did clean it with soap and water. I sanded it down, and I had to put a coat of BLO on it. I let that dry overnight. I lightly sanded it again. Did the same thing, another coat of BLO, and tonight I put the first coat of wax on it. It's certainly going to need at least one more coat, probably two. I also cleaned up the ferrule. The ferrule is a touch loose. I could probably maybe pin that either with epoxy or with maybe just a punch. Maybe just tighten it down. It's not really critical that it's, as long as it's not flying around, that's fine. And there, that can be, as I said, that can be epoxy. That's not a big issue there. But it did, getting this back to what I would call usable condition and looking half decent took quite a while. It took several hours, and that's not counting the soaking time and drying and all that. It was definitely an operation, and that's when we talk. That's where I'm always on the fence with recommending buying vintage tools and restoring them. I wouldn't have, one of these took me a few hours. I'm not hardly an expert at tool restoration, but I have done it enough to know to get a tool that's pretty messed up back into working condition. I couldn't imagine having to do this with 3 more chisels to make my chisel set. If you enjoy that, then great. It's we're doing this out of enjoyment. Most of us, the vast majority of us, are doing this because we enjoy it. We're not doing it because we're making our living at it or we're selling something. We're just doing it because it's a hobby that we enjoy doing. If you enjoy restoring tools, great. I enjoy it myself. If you are buying tools every store because you're trying to build a toolkit, then maybe you might not want to go the vintage route for everything. As I've talked about this before, it took quite a while to get this done, and this was just one single tool of many that you will need. If you want to, if you're getting into woodworking to build furniture, and the tools are the secondary aspect of the hobby, then restoration might not be viable for your entire set, is all I'm saying. I certainly wouldn't want to wish one of these restorations 20 times over for anybody who's getting into woodworking. You're going to have to buy new tools at some point, unless you have people that are giving you tools that are what I would call basically user friendly already. They're already users. They just need a little bit of cleaning and sharpening. If you're restoring them, now if you're like this plane here, I mentioned before, when I got this plane, it was literally, it looked like an anchor that was sitting at the bottom of the ocean. That's how much rust was on it. It took me hours to get this thing looking like it does, and it's not even perfect. I mean, it looks a heck of a lot better than it did when I got it. I mean, it's night and day, but I could have done more, put it that way. So if we're using this chisel here as an example, very good chisel, great tool steel. The tool steel feels excellent. It just feels as good as my Lie-Nielsen chisels, the steel on those. And those Lie-Nielsen chisels are very highly touted and recommended, and they're raved over by a lot of people. Just go with a little bit of caution if you're going to be going the entire restoration route. This here wasn't really a tool restoration more than it was a tool cleaning, and it took a little bit of elbow grease, a little bit of time, but I knew when I started cleaning this, I knew that it was going to look pretty good by the time I was done with it. This, on the other hand, this could have been a disaster. Disaster is a harsh word. This could have been a wasted effort, let's put it that way. I'm glad it wasn't, but, and furthermore, I have a 3/8 chisel already. I didn't really need this, but rather than seeing it sitting continuing to sit on a shelf for 40 years and just rot away, I figured I have enough knowledge. I mean, I'm not great, but I know enough to get this thing looking half decent and working again. And I felt like I sort of like I owed it to the tool to make sure that it was usable if somebody wanted to use it. Let's put it that way. So once again, I appreciate you guys watching, and you have a great night. And I hopefully will have some more videos up soon. Thanks.